I think this is an extremely high integrity company. This is a great national treasure. Leadership has done a pretty good job. Not ideal, not perfect. Something which, you know, we saw 42 countries or whatever initially ground this fleet, including from China to Canada, was pretty disturbing. The company's leadership expressed remorse. It would be great to have had the CEO up there and talk about the sadness over the loss of life, but also be out there with you and with the general media, briefing us and communities. What do they know? This fellow we've seen quoted, Tama, I believe his name, Mr. Tama from Aeron, his data got to the New York Times before it's left the lips of the company's top leadership, is they could be briefing us a little bit better on this. Now, I know they're trying to gather the data on site, and they also are trying to take a look at these flight patterns. But if you read about in the New York Times, we're reading about what we could have heard from the company, from the exact same sources, by the way, some of the same sources. These expert sources. Also, I think we need to know that I'm sure that they put the A-team on this. Some of the quiet reports have been that all levels of management have been actively engaged, talking with one another. But we could see, like Mary Barra did at GM or Jim Burke at the Tylenol recall, which is nothing compared to this, at Johnson & Johnson, was to take a look at what they can do to make sure we have the A-team investigating the source of the problem. In the military, if you have a single specific type unexplained aircraft crash, the whole series is brought down. The whole plane series is brought down for investigation. It's reasonable that they ground this, and I think, you know, every analyst is raving about this company's balance sheet. They'll be able to withstand this. The software fix looks good, so I think it's pretty encouraging long term for Boeing. They could get out there a little bit more, though, Dominic.
All right, so
right now.
So Jeffrey, there's been a lot made right now about how Boeing leadership has handled this. There have also been concerns echoed about whether our national leadership, namely President Trump and his administration and the FAA, how they have gone about handling it. What have you seen out of that particular line of strategy that perhaps either gives you pause or a little bit of at least positivity about what's happening at the FAA level?
Well, when we have these horrible disasters, and again, obviously our hearts go out to the families in both of these incidents. We're looking at 250 lives lost, sadly. We usually have a problem between a little bit of a gap between the FAA that often actually gathers the data, the National Safety Board, Transportation Safety Board, that actually analyzes the data for us. In this case, those guys are working together, as far as we can tell, quite smoothly. But we have the White House and the president getting out ahead of them in separate course from Boeing, and Boeing yet on a different vector. Is all these 3-4 parties need to be together on the same vector. That's within the U.S. In terms of a cumulative effect of you know, America first, and we're number one in all this. I wouldn't quite use the term schadenfreude, because surely no sensible person celebrates this horrible tragedy. But yet the loss of credibility that we have, that the FAA is not, and the National Transportation Safety Board were not the places that people wanted to send the black box recorders when the Ethiopians were getting the data. They wanted to send it off to Europe, and that usually we were the gold standard. And some of our trust has been lost a little bit here, and I think that's a little bit at issue right now. But I think Boeing can do a lot to get out there, to tell us what happened, what they know, how long these planes are likely to be grounded, what they can figure out about this fix, this software fix. If we knew about this, gosh, why didn't we get on this faster? And then, of course, there's the patterns, as the sensors were telling us that we have the noses bobbing with an automatic pilot pulling the planes downward. That's really disturbing. But if they have corrections for this, that's reassuring. But we need to have our government agencies, the company, all working in the same direction. We have a lot of fence mending to do right now with international parties. As you were mentioning at the top of the show, it's basically 4,500 massive, planes out there in order. This is a pretty big darn deal. And we also have whatever liabilities they are. I don't know if Ken Feinberg, the pay czar, who's so good at adjudicating liability, is what they're going to do in terms of either lost revenues of some of these airlines, which they're not hopefully going to have to address, or else in a bigger sense, of course, if there's any liability on loss of life.
So Jeffrey, before I let you go, if I may, you mentioned credibility. You mentioned trying to gain trust. If I could turn you away from Boeing for a moment here, Wells Fargo has been in the story quite a bit. Its CEO, Tim Sloan, taking to Capitol Hill to talk about Wells Fargo's case there. What do you think has happened now with Wells Fargo? Have they now regained some credibility with lawmakers and, of course, with the investing public and its customer base after the scandal that they've gone through over the past couple of years?
Absolutely. While I give Boeing's leadership a B+, A-, I give Tim Sloan and the whole top leadership of Wells Fargo on how they've come through a crisis where, thank goodness, there's no loss of life, but a crisis of credibility 2 years ago. Tim Sloan, the CEO of Wells Fargo, he's only been on the job now a full 2 years and a couple of weeks, couple of months. It's a remarkable job. They right now are the third best retail banking institution in terms of what the customer surveys show us and the loyalty. He's changed out the top leadership team. Most of his top team, certainly at least half of them are new, and he's got 2 new senior hires coming right in. The board is changed over dramatically. Is largely, certainly more than half a new board. But the financial results, oh my gosh, they have the best EPS in the last 166 years of the company, since the company's founding. And credit, I think what we saw is we've seen in capital, surprise, surprise, in Washington, some grandstanding at the expense of an easy scapegoat, political grandstanding. We've also seen the media, in particular, I'm surprised, disappointed, the Wall Street Journal, which has had great coverage of this issue, which I thought was appropriately harsh 2 years ago. They're missing the main story, that this guy is almost a country vicar of good governance. He is Tim Sloan. He's not some wild backslapping guy. He's really quietly getting the job done.
Gotcha.
And virtually every single problem we've seen surface in the last 2 years, unlike before, it was a surprise by regulators. Now the company has been surfacing these things, and the board has just endorsed that with a nice pay increase for him, showing the heck with all this. I think that a lot of the public discourse that we've seen in Congress and in a few newspapers has basically been the last flicker of the candle. Is they've chosen to reward this guy on long-term incentives, around $18 million in long-term incentives, and that's great. And even giving him a bonus this past year, that shows how well they see he's doing on the job. I think it's a great story of quiet comeback, and good for Tim Sloan and his top leadership team.